Welcome to Season 2 of Frontline Fridays, brought to you by Ubic. I'm your host, Ron Thurston, and this season, we're digging deeper into what it really takes to lead on the front lines of retail and hospitality. Together, we'll explore the biggest shifts in frontline work and how smart leaders are navigating them to drive results where it matters most. Each episode, you'll hear from top executives, industry experts, and powerhouse operators who share practical tactics you can put to work immediately. So here's the big question for today. Why do some strategies look brilliant in the boardroom but collapse in the store? And more importantly, what can leaders do to close the gap? My guest today is Kevin Ertell, founder of Mistere Advisory and author of an upcoming book, The Strategy Trap: Why Companies Fail at Execution and How to Get It Right. Kevin's career spans global retail operations at Nike, Sur La Table, Borders, and Tower Records. His new framework, the 6 C's of Execution, is built to help leaders turn ambition into action and to make sure strategies actually show up in stores, not just on slide decks. Hey, Kevin, welcome to Frontline Fridays.
Ron, good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you. So we have a funny, maybe it's a joke. I think people would also laugh about this. For those of you not on video, Kevin and I look like twin brothers. And I think I am older than you are, but no. And we have fun when you and I have been together in person. It's pretty hilarious.
It is true. And we have been mistaken for each other.
We have been mistaken for each other. And Scott Galloway. We're just going to put Scott Galloway in the mix between the three of us. He's quite a bit richer than either one of us, but that's okay. Yeah. And you have this incredible background with these brands that I introduced you really briefly, but I think in the spirit of this beautiful book that you've written, I'd love to have you go through a little bit more of your background and why it felt like this was the right time to write a book about strategy.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I started on the front lines. I started as a clerk at Tower Records. Greatest job ever. And Tower, I always start talking about my background there because Tower was so formative for me. I started on the front line. I worked with customers every day. I knew the ins and outs of retail. And Tower was a company that believed in promoting within. So I actually was at Tower for 20 years. I started as a clerk and I left as a senior vice president. It was a great ride. And being around music all the time was amazing. But after Tower, I also went to other places. I was at Borders. I ran Borders.com and the Borders loyalty program. I was at a company called Online Shoes as the CMO. I was at Sur La Table, where I led digital and tech and marketing. And I spent 7 years at Nike. So a few different roles at Nike. Initially leading the digital business for running category. Then I led global digital operations. And then the last job I had there was global retail operations. So yeah, a full circle back to the stores again before I went off and started my own consulting business.
Yeah. And that's relatively recent.
Yeah, I left Nike at the end of 2023, started the business a few months later, and Mistere Advisory is called. And I help companies with strategic execution as well as executive coaching and doing some advising.
Yeah, and your background across multiple parts of our industry is the part that I find most interesting because you had marketing, product, stores, of course, and growing up in stores. And I often reflect on my own skill set today wouldn't be the same had I not grown up in stores. Right. And I think the same for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I've talked about this, the experience you get as a store manager is such valuable experience. I mean, I think any corporation anywhere should hire store managers from retail because, man, they've been through it all. And, know how to manage people, know how to deal with crises, deal with P&Ls. They've done it all. And they're incredible people.
And you're right. Corporate roles don't prepare you for the width of skill sets that are required to run stores. So I know we could have a love fest here to talk about the importance and relevance of careers in stores. And I would be the first one jumping on that because I believe so wholly in what you're saying. I also know you just spoke with Matt Marcotte about his book. I watched that this morning, and they're such visionary people who spent their career running the field who now have this wealth of knowledge like you that are bringing this to the world. So tell us why you wrote this book. Tell us more about the book. And then we're going to dig into some details.
Yeah, I mean, this is a passion topic for me. So, the book, The Strategy Trap, it's the subtitle is Why Companies Fail at Execution and How to Get It Right. And it's pretty well known that most strategies fail. And the number one reason they fail is poor execution. And so I really wanted to tackle that. It's something I've always been pretty good at, and so I kind of looked out there and I saw lots and lots and lots of books about how to write strategies. Like, we definitely don't need any more of those. Relatively few books on how to execute. Most of the books I saw on execution were pretty much written by academics and consultants, and so I really wanted to bring the operator's perspective to it. Someone who's been there and done that. I also didn't want it to be just my point of view, though. So I interviewed a lot of other operators. I interviewed a lot of people, over 60 people, to hear everybody's best practices and then really try to pull all that together into one framework that would be practical and easy for people to read, understand, but actually have some how-tos to take away and actually make a difference. So I wanted to help, really.
And frameworks always do. And we're definitely going to dig into that. But before we do, of those 60 plus people, what surprised you? Maybe what surprised you most and what didn't surprise you?
I think what surprised me most was that I started by talking to people in retail, the people I knew the best, but I always would ask people who they knew who was a good executor, who was really good at doing this. And eventually that took me into all sorts of different industries. What I started to find is it didn't matter what the industry was. Some of these truisms were the same always. And I was able to pull together these sort of best practice framework that just works no matter what. And I think the reason it works no matter what is because this is all about people. The strategy might be an idea, but the execution is about creating conditions for humans to actually turn that idea into reality. And I think it doesn't matter what the industry is. The human piece of it is the same.
Agreed. Yeah, the actual output of the work or the competencies required to do that work within that industry might be different. The environments that we thrive in as humans and as leaders, it doesn't really matter what you're selling. Look at your career. You sold records and you sold great footwear and you sold books and, I sold computers and luxury handbags. So, it's just, it isn't really about what you're selling. It's how you're leading.
Yep, exactly.
What didn't surprise you? I was just going to say, you mentioned, that most strategies fail. Were you not surprised that they said the same thing?
What I did, though, is I was talking to people who were really good at executing. And so maybe what didn't surprise me is that the conversations were always about the people. They weren't about, all the strategy stuff, creating moats and, where can we win and stuff. It wasn't ever about that. The best people that I talked to who had the best success in executing were always talking about people. And I think that didn't actually surprise me because that's been my experience, so I think that part was good.
It's almost surprising if they didn't say that. So let's dig into this framework. I want to speak about it at a high level that would maybe apply to all, and then speak about it as it applies to, our audience here on Frontline Fridays, which is a lot of it retail and hospitality. So kind of walk us through your framework and then we'll go deeper.
Yeah, so I break it into two phases, setting the stage and showtime. And within each of those phases are 3 C's, so 6 C's total. The first 3 C's are co-creation, clarity, and capacity. So we got to build this together, co-creation. It's got to be so clear and simple that everybody can understand it and it's meaningful to people. And capacity, we got to have room to be able to actually execute this. We can't just drop it on top of everything else. So that's the setting the stage. And then in showtime, it's communication, coordination, and coaching. Communication is everything. We've got to stay on top of it. And, we as humans are actually pretty bad at communicating with each other. So like a real focus on that matters. Getting very structured and coordination. And then coaching is an aspect of leadership to me. It's a subset of leadership, but in the context of execution, it's about really actively managing the situation, helping motivate people, make sure that, messages are being delivered, that you're providing the right incentives, to create all those conditions for people to actually go out and get the work done. So that's the big picture on the 6 C's.
And of the first three, you said you were kind of preparing for show,
Setting the stage,
setting the stage. Okay. And why is that such an important part of successful strategy execution?
Yeah, I think as I talked to all those people, probably the most common theme I heard from people was you have to slow down to speed up. That was very consistent across all of it. And that is not the natural tendency of many executives who are type A and just want to go. You have to take some time to get set the stage, to set the conditions so that you can go fast later. What I find is if you don't do that, you're going to slow down later. And when you slow down later, it's going to be in a much worse way than if you just slowed down to begin with to set the stage and get things going,
And then showtime, meaning you've put the work in, you've slowed down, but showtime is really where it could speed up.
Now you're starting to activate, but you've done this work up front. But even in the book, I talk about, showtime doesn't mean that it's all done. In the book, I actually tell the story of Hamilton a little bit, and Lin-Manuel Miranda, and all the work he did early on. Hamilton actually didn't start in his mind. It was going to be a concept album. It wasn't even going to be a play. He had this idea. He co-created. He started to work with lots of people. He shaped it. He turned it into something that was ready to put in front of an audience, but he didn't put it on Broadway right away. He went off Broadway and he put it out a little bit and he tested it and he worked on it and he refined it, and I think strategy is the same way. You got to take that time up front to even get to that off Broadway production, that maybe the pilots you're going to do in a few stores or whatever you're going to do. But then you have to build in lots of time within that to go, okay, is it working? Is it not working? Where do we need to adjust, and really be thinking about this entire process across all those phases, and iterate till you're really humming, and then you're ready for Broadway, and then go for it. That's kind of the way I think about it.
And then it's everyone working toward the same goals. In that instance, like great sales and great audiences, great press, the whole thing. You're right. Exactly. It applies to all kinds of different businesses. I often think about co-creation as the one that is often the kind of most misunderstood when it comes to retail, because I think it's so individualized. Departments, they work in silos often because the function of the departments is so unique, and the skill sets of the people in those departments are so specialized. Planning and allocation, finance, buying, marketing, merchandising, all of them are so special. And I think the actual ability to co-create, to think about stores, is really complex. I have not seen it done particularly well.
No, it's often not, which is why most strategies fail.
Right.
And that's the thing. Like if you do everything within your function, you might be really tight in the function, but execution breaks down in the handoffs. It's the cross-functional stuff where it all breaks down, because you have to be able to be looking at the big picture, the North Star, and have that really clear and understand the role each function plays in getting to that. And they can't do it alone. In retail, of course, is a perfect example, because you might have all these functions in corporate, but it all comes to life in a store all at the same time. So it has to be effective, it has to come complete, and you understand how it all fits together.
And include the store in this.
Yes.
Often the recipient of this, as generally, their voices are not always included in co-creation.
Correct. And I think for me, like the main points of co-creation are that you get alignment, you get validation, and you get commitment. And you need to, kind of involve people at every aspect of what's going to be involved in bringing the strategy to life in order to get to that point, And also you really get the commitment with it by doing that. There's something called the IKEA effect. And this was something a behavioral scientist, Dan O'Reilly, did the study, and he had a few groups of people, and with some groups, they got an existing piece of IKEA furniture, and he asked them how much it was worth. Other groups, they got the box and they had to build the furniture. And he asked them what it was worth. The people who built it themselves valued it at 63% higher than the people who just got the furniture. So just the act of being involved in it and understand how it came together.
You had to work for it.
They had to work for it, but they created it.
Yeah.
And so once they created it, they valued it higher. They were much more committed to it, in other words. And so, the aspect or the idea of co-creation is not just about getting all the ideas and making sure you have a well-rounded. That's super, super important. But it's also a huge part of getting the alignment, so, and the commitment. So it plays such a critical role. It's the first part of the book because it's the most important thing, really, I think.
Yeah. It's so interesting because it applies to so many things in life and work and all of it. We hear the word collaboration a lot, but I actually think co-creation in this instance is a much more valid way to describe it.
Yeah.
Because collaboration can feel very fluffy. We're going to collaborate on this, but we're going to co-create something feels more substantial.
Yeah. And it is more substantial, it really is. And you get the best out of everybody that way. So
I love it. I've heard you mention this idea of like the messy middle.
Yeah.
So tell me what that means and where that sits in your framework.
You might have some senior executives who have some key ideas, big ideas, and they use their, executive language to talk about them. And then you have the front line, whether that's retail or any kind of business. At the front line is where all the action happens and where the customers meet the business. And in between all of that is the messy middle. That's where all the chaos happens. It's where the conflicts happen. It's where communication breaks down. It's where the chaos is, and so that's always been my focus to like, how do I take all this chaos and create clarity out of it and bring some structure to it? And really the 6 C's, that's what they're about. They're all about bringing some order to all of that messy middle so that everyone can kind of operate with it in a much better sort of structured way that everyone can relate to, understand their component, in context of the broader strategy, and therefore make it happen.
So if I were a store manager again today, you and I were going to go back and run a store. We'd be really good at it, by the way. And we picked up your book. Like, walk us through how the framework would apply to frontline leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can take the exact same ideas and you can put it in really any environment, and you start with, hey, maybe it's this week's business, this month's business, what's going on this quarter, maybe this season. Team, let's get together. How are we going to pull this together? We know what our objectives are. We know what our goal is, or our targets are for the season. How are we going to make it there? What do we know? What do we not know? What do we got to do together to make this happen? Like, get the team involved in that. The next is definitely about clarity, and that's a little bit about those targets I talked about. What are the metrics that we're going to be using that really matter, and why do they matter, and how do they fit together? How are we setting up our goals, and have we set up goals that are cascading, not just the broad revenue goal, but what's the goal at each, part of the team? Maybe there's some sales associate goals, maybe there's some backroom efficiency goals, because that's super critical to provide fuel to the sales. How do they all fit together? Capacity, super important in the store. We can't just load all this on top. So if we have new stuff coming in, what is moving out? What are we stopping? What are we reducing? In the book, I talk about reduce, reuse, recycle, as in terms of tasks we're doing, in terms of even processes we have, maybe we could reapply in a different way. Team, who's got transferable skills that we might move around. And then, you really start to map out the communication within the store. Who's talking to who about what and when, and what methodology are we using? What systems are we using? Where is that message going to be repeated? I talk in the book about a time with a Nike, we had Kara Lawson come in and talk to the team. It was actually a store managers meeting. And Kara Lawson is the coach of the Duke basketball team, women's basketball team. And she talked about early, loud, and continuous as this method of communication she would tell her players. And she'd say, I want you to be early. You got to say, if you see a pick coming, for example, call it out early. And we're in an arena. You got to be loud. And you keep saying it because they might not have heard you the first time. And I thought that's like such an excellent way to think about communicating anything, and if you're in a store, hey, what's coming? Do it early. Be loud, be in every place you can think of to talk about it, and don't say it once. You have to say it a lot of times for it to stick, and then again, coordination matters in a store too. What are our checkpoints? How do we know where things are going? Let's really think through it. And certainly last but not least is coaching, which is a critical component of a store leader. How are you now that you're in the season, paying attention to everything, motivating people, answering questions, clearing obstacles, making it easier for your team?
You could do that on a single day. You could find ways to navigate all 6 of those C's in a single day.
And if you constantly have that at the top of your head, like I got to get through all these C's every day, you're going to crush it.
You're going to crush it every day. I think what I love about the simplicity of those 6 C's is that anyone could pick this book up and say, I want to apply this to my work. And say, when I think about frontline hospitality, retail leaders, don't wait for your district manager to come in and teach you about the 6 C's. Pick up a book, leadership books, and test and learn and try and do things with your team. And, you're not kind of breaking any company policy by testing new leadership skills. That's how you get better, how this works. And the simplicity of great frameworks and models is that it applies to all. You don't have to be a senior vice president to learn the 6 C's.
That is true. I love that.
I hear you describe them and I'm like, absolutely, yes, that would work. Here's how. This is where this would apply. This is the kinds of businesses that would work. As simple as sometimes frameworks can sound, if they were done well, then you wouldn't have needed to write this book. And those 60 people wouldn't have told you that, most of the time strategy fails because of it. It's great to kind of watch it unfold for you and how people will apply this.
Yeah, I'm super eager to see what people think of it when they get it and how they apply it. But I hope I tried to make it very practical, very simple, very easy to with step by step, stuff in there so that it would be hopefully useful out of the gate.
What about when you think about the pressure of just business overall, but particularly stores? They are under a daily pressure to deliver, and we're handing kind of another tool to them. What would be your response of like, oh, it's something else, something new. I don't have time for this.
Yeah, I go right back to slow down to speed up, because in the end, it's super easy to get into the cycle of I don't have time for this. But the reason you don't have time for it is because you keep saying I don't have time for it. Right. And then I've been there for sure. It's very easy to get wrapped up in that. So at some point you have to slow down to speed up. But the payoff is so much better when you get really organized and you set something up where the people on your team can be more effective. And when they can be more effective, guess what? Not only does your business results show, but they're much happier. People are more confident in their work when they know what's expected of them and they understand how it sits in context of the broader goals. They understand what success is and how they're doing on their path to getting there. We all love that. It gives you so much more confidence when you know that. And so it's worth it to take the time to do that. You will see the results without a doubt.
Absolutely agree. And I think the teams that observe their leaders doing what you're describing, instead of it like constant hair on fire, panic, we missed the day yesterday and my DM's calling me, like that slow down to say, let's think about co-creating the strategy for today. It's Saturday. I write in Retail Pride, one of the top 10 reasons that we love retail is because like Saturday is the best day of the week. You can almost always predict it, that it's going to be the highest volume. You're going to have the least amount of distractions. You're going to have the highest traffic. Everything works in your favor on those big days. And just if you co-create it and say, what do we need to do today in order to win? How do we do that? As maybe your morning meeting, or maybe you're trying something different, or you've had 3 call outs already. You're in this constant state of co-creation and re-co-creation in order to win. Instead of being frustrated and then losing, start the model over again, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that idea. And think about it. Like even if you think about it in case of you're not the manager, you're one of the associates, and the manager says to you, hey, here's what's going on today. Here's the issues we got to deal with. Here's what success looks like. How do you think we can get there? You're out there every day. What do you think?
Right.
How do you feel about that? You feel great about that. Yeah, let me tell you, I got some ideas. And then you go do them, and sometimes they don't work, but you learn something from that.
Yeah. And then that person is engaged in their work and they're ready to continue to add more. And, if you think back to your career, early Tower Records, I'm sure people gave you stretch assignments and asked you to do things that you weren't ready to do.
Oh
kind
yeah.
of co-created work.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, maybe this is something I talked about Tower being so foundational, but Tower gave you a ton of autonomy in the stores, and so like I was a product buyer. We didn't have central buying. I bought product, and the first section I bought product in, I was very ambitious as a clerk, and I wanted to move up and do different things, and there was an opening to be the classical buyer. I was the only one in the store that knew anything about classical music, and that was only because I played in high school band. So I didn't really know anything about it, but I wanted to jump into that, and I did. And the manager I had said, "I get that you don't know anything about classical music really, but there was this one customer we had, and he came in every Saturday and bought lots of stuff, and he said, I'm going to talk to him and see if he'll tutor you, and I'll give him free records, for tutoring you." And that's what happened. And this guy took me through the section. He taught me a bunch of stuff. And then all of a sudden, I'm buying the classical music for the store. I'm bringing the right product in. The section is growing. It's doing really well. But all because I got the chance and I was given a chance to co-create it and build the strategy and make it part of the store.
It's that kind of, you're not 100% ready, but you've got people around you like who communicate well, and continue to fuel the success of everyone around you. When I think about strategy and execution at the store level, that is about also communication and how that looks and feels and when is it done and how is it done, and thinking about it from a multi-generational standpoint, because it just gets more and more complex as you start to map it out. That's the other part about retail, is that everyone on your team kind of needs something different. And maybe some are part-time. You and I could chat about the differences between like corporate roles and field roles. But because field roles are often 40+% part-time, co-creating with people where this really isn't maybe their chosen career or it's one of 3 jobs is a real way to engage people.
Yeah.
Same in hospitality. Your audience is not all full-time employees. And that adds such a level of complexity that I think is underestimated, I'll say.
Challenging, but also kind of a beautiful thing, like the someone that has the multiple jobs or multiple part of their lives brings a diversity to your team that if you lean into, you can get ideas that you never would have gotten otherwise. And they can really make an amazing thing,
Any other stories you want to just highlight from the book as we kind of wrap this up, Kevin?
Oh boy. I'll tell one story about something I screwed up, and I didn't do enough of co-creation. I didn't do enough of getting it right. Is when we were building the Borders Rewards loyalty program. We had it out in some test stores, but we had built it top down. I mean, we decided what the program was going to be. We did all the training. We sent it out to the stores, and it did not do well in these test stores. And we surveyed both the customers and we call them booksellers, the associates. And we found very few customers who liked the program, and same with the booksellers. But we found some customers who liked it. And it turned out always that they talked to a bookseller who was enthusiastic about it. Okay. But the light bulb went off for me was like, I had been a clerk at Tower Records, and I knew that I really didn't care about corporate priorities when I was on the floor in the store. I cared about the person in front of me, and that's what mattered to me most. And I realized we totally missed that whole idea. And so we went back and we spent a lot of time out with the booksellers. What's meaningful to you? What do your customers think matters? And when we went to launch the program to the whole company, we built 2 marketing campaigns, one external and one internal. And then the internal one, the whole theme was a program you'll be proud to share. And that was what we focused on after we got all this feedback from booksellers about what mattered to them. So we put it out there that way. All the training was around that. And here's why your customer will value it. And it came from them. It went gangbusters. I mean, the first year of the program, we had a stretch goal to get 6 million members. We didn't think that was possible, but we were going for it. At the end of that first year, we had 16 million members.
Wow.
And it's all because we learned and we went back and we had the booksellers really help us drive this thing, and we co-created with them, and we made it really clear what it was all about, and then they crushed it.
It worked without even having the language behind it at the time. The framework, I should say.
Thinking back on it, we didn't have the framework, but we really did the things. We did pretty much the 6 C's. Maybe not exactly as I fully described it. I mean, I learned a lot more in my career and got better at it, but we did a lot of that.
Yeah, and think about the financial upside of 16 million loyal members of a business.
It was beautiful.
How a strategy has such powerful financial benefit.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And that's, you build a strategy, you've got to lay out what your success measures are, and that's part of being clear about what this is all about.
Right. If there were one thing that you could share, for retail and hospitality leaders that they could do tomorrow to maybe shift the dynamic of their strategy, and same strategies can be small. It could be, like I said, strategy could be Saturday.
Yeah,
let's have a Saturday strategy, or you're, reinventing a multi-billion-dollar brand. We use the word in many different ways. But what's one thing retail hospitality leaders could do?
Maybe one of the best things you can do, and it's around clarity, really. Get super clear about the why and the what. And the what here is, what is the expected outcome? What is success? We got to be super clear to our teams about what does success look like. And then explain the why. Why does that matter? Make sure people understand the why. In the book, I talk about getting really clear about those two things and then delegate the how. The team that's close to it, you've made them they're super clear now about what the success looks like. They're super clear about why that matters. You're in the heart of it. What do you think we can do to get there? I think that practice, to your point earlier, you could do that every single day,
Every day.
You would really get magic out of that.
Incredible. Where can people find you and find this book that's coming out? Give us some details.
Yeah, so for sure you can find me on LinkedIn. My business is Mistere Advisory. The website is mistereadvisory.com. The book is called The Strategy Trap. You can go to strategytrap.com, and also the book will be wherever books are sold.
Amazing. Yeah. And early 2026.
Yes, comes out February 3rd, 2026. I'm excited to get my baby out there.
It feels good. Take it from someone who has done it a couple of times. It feels great. Amazing. Thank you, Kevin. Really, really appreciate your time. This was a pleasure, and congrats on the book.
Thank you, sir. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and always great to talk to your audience and the store Frontline folks. I love them.
Always. Thanks, Kevin. Execution isn't the work that happens after the strategy. It is the strategy. Kevin's 6 C's are more than concepts. They're the difference between a strategy that gets lost in translation and one that your teams can actually deliver on. So here's my challenge for you this week. Don't just hand your team a list of priorities. Ask things like, do we all understand the why? Do we have the capacity and ability to deliver? And what can we stop doing that will make room for what matters? This shift toward co-creation can unlock momentum that may be missing in your execution, because successful execution is about doing what matters together. Thanks for listening, and a special thanks to Ubik, the presenter of Frontline Fridays. Ubik is the AI-powered platform that helps retail and hospitality leaders connect, train, and empower their teams. Ready to make your frontline your competitive advantage? Visit Ubik.com. That's YOOBIC.com to learn more. Until next time, keep leading boldly and keep co-creating.